The Senate in the last few years basically doesn't do anything. We don't even vote. Senator Begich, who may have been defeated yesterday, had the handicap of trying to explain to the people of Alaska why in 6 years he hadn't had a roll call vote on the floor on an amendment. First item up in the new Senate will be the Keystone XL pipeline, the Hoven bill. It will be open for amendment.
I am hopeful that the discussion that we will have on this floor will help advance us as a Senate, as a Congress, and really as a country.
An amendment to have every member of the Senate be put on record on whether or not the oil coming through the Keystone pipeline is then exported out of the United States.
Our amendment recognizes the importance of the iron and steel industries in our country and ensures that if the pipeline is built, it is built with American iron and steel.
I joined my colleague, Senator Portman from Ohio, in a bipartisan amendment around energy efficiency. This is a very short version that passed the House last year overwhelmingly.
Now, the Equal Access to Justice Act limits awards of attorney's fees to $125 per hour and allows those awards to be granted only to prevailing parties. If such terms are acceptable for nearly every other type of lawsuit against the federal government, certainly they should be acceptable as applied to the Endangered Species Act.
Pet coke is the byproduct of Canadian tar sands refinery. This pipeline will generate 15,000 tons a day of pet coke that has to be stored. We're asking that it be stored responsibly.
Unsuitable coal has been piled up for decades. It forms mountains. Pennsylvania alone has 2 billion tons. We have an industry that is solving this problem, systematically turning this coal into electric power. And I have an amendment to exempt these 19 power plants from the particularly onerous regulations.
I hope this is a place where we can get together and have a strong, positive vote that sends a signal that this Senate, at this time in our history, is ready to deal with reality.
Mr. President, climate is changing, and climate has always changed, and it always will. There's archaeological evidence of that. There's biblical evidence of that. There's historic evidence of that. I ask my colleagues to vote for the White House Inhofe Amendment.
What we do within this side-by-side is effectively lay out findings contained within the administration's EIS. We further go into a sense of the Senate that acknowledges, again, after the vote that we just had, that climate is real and that there is an impact.
That language simply states that climate change is real, that climate change is caused by humans and principally by carbon pollution.
My amendment says that we should acknowledge the benefit that parks provide to our local and regional communities and their economies.
Our national parks are facing $13 billion in maintenance needs. This amendment has been softened so that the limitations are now just considerations.
This amendment would open up the courthouse door for disputes over whether to place worthy lands under protection because of challenges that there's not enough resources or certain issues were not considered ahead of time.
My amendment basically says that right now the only baseload fuels that we have are coal and nuclear. That's going to expand to natural gas. But what we're asking for is we need a federal commitment from the President and from Congress to invest in the research and development of fossil energy.
A vote to table this amendment is a vote to reject science, and that's a very bad idea for the United States Senate.
The purpose of this amendment is to expedite the process by which the Bureau of Land Management processes applications for a permit for drilling on federal land. And the average right now for them to be processed is about 7.5 months. That's too long.
We have a sense of the Senate that would express that all forms of bitumen or synthetic crude should be subject to the 8-cent per barrel excise tax that's associated with the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, to make sure that it's consistent with the Constitution, which requires revenue-raising measures to originate in the House.
Senator Murkowski's amendment is a non-binding resolution. I intend to go along with the Murkowski amendment, and after its consideration, I hope my colleagues will vote for my amendment, because closing this flagrant tax loophole is too important to wait.
We've actually reached a milestone here that I think is noteworthy for the Senate. Now, we just cast our 15th roll call vote on an amendment on this bill, which is more roll call votes on amendments than the entire United States Senate in all of 2014.
We know that under the rules of the Senate, this procedure could have been stopped at any moment by any senator. But yet we have worked in good faith with the good leadership of Senator Murkowski, Senator Cantwell, and Senator Boxer, and we want to continue to.
More than 70 senators just voted to close an outlandish tax loophole. It was a non-binding resolution. The next amendment that I offer allows the Senate to actually eliminate the flagrant loophole now.
This amendment just simply says that the United States should not be bound by the commitment that we're the only party that has a commitment made in the agreement with China.
The next amendment following the Cornyn Amendment seeks to prohibit the use of eminent domain in the building of the Keystone XL pipeline. My amendment simply reiterates that the standard in the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution applies.
Senator from New Jersey.
This amendment protects private property from unjust seizure by a foreign corporation using eminent domain proceedings against the will of those who are not willing sellers.
Mr. President.
Sufficient second.
The yeas and nays are ordered.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be allowed 1 minute to speak on my amendment before it's voted upon.
Is there objection?
Object.
The majority decided that they would not allow for a debate on an amendment I was propounding that would have imposed a tax upon the Canadian oil as it is being transported through this proposed pipeline.
What I seek to suggest with my amendment is that an 8-cent per barrel fee be assessed on the oil derived from tar sands, and that the revenues derived therefrom would be deposited not in the Oil Spill Liability Fund, but rather in the Land and Water Conservation Fund.
This measure would require the disclosure of political donations made by companies that stand to earn more than $1 million from this project.
My amendment is simply to make sure that people have appeals on actions under this law, they be able to appeal in the courts within their jurisdiction.
Would require by resolution that we fund LIHEAP, the Low Income Heating Assistance Program, at $4.7 billion.
it would require notification to governors and to county officials of risks to their drinking water supplies that may be caused by the Keystone pipeline.
Unfortunately, Michiganders also know firsthand the environmental dangers and risks that come with pipeline leaks.
This is the first I've heard that PHMSA may not have the resources that it needs to do its job. I think it would seem fair to have PHMSA come and tell us if they don't have adequate resources.
This amendment would provide a 15% rebate to homeowners so that we could install 10 million new solar rooftops across the country within 10 years.
This amendment would expedite the exports of liquid natural gas. There are right now at the Department of Energy some 28 applications pending to export liquid natural gas.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has determined that the lesser prairie chicken should be listed in a number of states, including Kansas, as a threatened species. But the consequences of listing the lesser prairie chicken that results from a drought is so dramatic that this amendment is necessary to set aside that listing as a threatened species.
It has all the earmarks of the biggest earmark ever. This bill requires disclosure over $10,000 of campaign contributions from entities that will make more than $1 million off this project.
My amendment simply expresses the sense of Congress that all future national monument designations should be subject to consultation with local governance and the approval of the governor and the legislature of the states in which designation would occur.
This amendment does not speak to the human role in climate change or emissions. It simply acknowledges that climate change is having an impact on our infrastructure and suggests that planning is responsible.
Effectively, what we are doing is releasing wilderness study areas if, within 1 year of receiving the recommendation, Congress has not designated the study area as wilderness.
This amendment would simply provide a sense of the Senate that we provide some certainty to the American wind and other renewable industries by taking a look at the production tax credits and actually having a forward progress report.
As it stands now, gas companies in this country do not have to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act. For decades now, this loophole has exempted hydrofracking and gas storage companies from this law. This special exemption is unfair, it's unnecessary, and it's unsafe. And my amendment would finally remove it from the law.
My amendment will express the sense of Congress that the Land and Water Conservation Fund plays an important role in improving wildlife habitat.
Simply what this amendment does is it makes permanent the Land and Water Conservation Fund.
This amendment creates a national market in renewable energy. This bill a bill similar to this has passed the Senate 3 times and also passed the House once.
The pending Keystone bill, however, would deem that the final environmental impact statement issued last January will fully satisfy NEPA. My amendment would change that and would preserve the obligations of agencies to supplement their environmental impact statements.
My amendment is very simple. It would require that before the Keystone XL pipeline is deemed approved, that we should determine whether carbon pollution, including the carbon pollution from the tar sands oil production, will contribute to an increase in more extreme weather events. Right now, the Canadian pipeline company is receiving a get-out-of-Canada-free slip. They do not have to pay taxes Well, the good news is we've been able to find a way of having a straight up and down vote on the substance of whether or not the Canadians have to pay into the oil spill liability fund.
You know, this is an important step in building the kind of energy plan that this country needs. We can't get to energy independence or energy security without building the infrastructure we need to move that energy from where it's produced to where it's consumed.
I think it is clear that we have a great deal of work in front of us, but I think we also have a better idea of where some of that common ground may be as a result of the discussions this past month.
Maybe it bodes well for a bigger bipartisan energy bill.